I always just say to people, how many legs do you run on at one time?
That always got me because that is so fucking.
But like, I don't get. But like,
Makes sense. You do everything on one leg, but you don't do anything on two legs.
Like, well, it's like, well, you're not a rabbit, right? Like, if you look at ambulation, you're constantly moving in legs in opposition. It's the way the body moves.
You need to make your own fun.
As a line coach, I'm behind the curtain and I'm just pulling strings.
My style
Is bold,
loud,
abrasive.
I'm opinionated.
I'm brutally honest, and I am direct. There's a reason I'm sitting here and not standing on the sideline somewhere coaching up an offensive line. Unfortunately, in this day and age, that's not exactly the style people are looking for.
I want to talk about the detailed things that
Nobody wants to talk about. I want to talk about
the real analysis.
these men that we're going to bring on can give great insight to those types of things. That's what this
Program's got to be about.
It is InTrench'd with Coach Googe. My name is Dylan Vazzano. We're coming at you from steamy, sunny South Florida. All O-line all the time. The most important position group for the most popular sport in America. Fired up about today's big dog guest. You're talking about a legend of the game, world renowned in the strength and conditioning world, Mike Boyle, not just in the football side of the equation, but you're talking about NHL, where he has trained Stanley Cup champions, Major League Baseball, trained World Series champions, NBA, Olympics, gold medals left and right. He's trained just about everyone. I know what a big deal this guy is. He's trained you as well.
Well, I don't come in at the World Series champion or Olympic gold medalist, but yes, very influential in my development as an athlete, as an undersized guy, if you will, trying to play at a level higher than I probably should have. But this guy has also had an influence on me as a coach and has helped me kind of he helped guide me into coaching. And obviously it's been beneficial to me and my family to be in the coaching field. Now, one unique thing about Mike Boyle, everywhere I go as an offensive line coach, the strength coach seems, for whatever reason, they gravitate to the new line coach and they want to explain what they do in the weight room, their philosophy, their training methods, whatever. All I have to do is mention that I was trained by Mike Boyle, and immediately they step back with big eyes and in amazement say, okay, then you get it. Because we're talking about a guy that really invented the field in the modern day. Now, there were guys that helped lifters, power lifters, and even Olympic lifters back in the day, but this guy invented the all-around athletic development. And it's just amazing. It's an amazing story, and I'm happy that we have him on InTrench'd.
Yeah, it's exciting too, because I know that we've gone kind of down this road before. A past episode with Chris Doyle, who of course Mike trained as well, and the commitment to everything that goes into strength and conditioning. And the great thing about Mike, and then we'll get the chance to speak with him and learn more about that, is you're talking about the elite athletes, but you're also talking about kids and older people and kind of the entire spectrum there of so many different kinds of athletes. And then, like we said, with kids and older people as well.
Well, listen, he'll go down to all the way down to 11 years old, up to 80 years old. This is a guy that believes that the strength and physical development throughout a lifetime can help you live a better life, operate better, whether it's on the field or off. I mean, he's really a life coach in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I mean, this is the father of modern day combine training for the National Football League. So many athletes that he's trained that their stock rose because he trained them to do the drills at such a high level that their numbers went off the charts, all those draft charts all over the league. So he's innovative, and I think what is standard these days, he kind of created that. He developed the techniques that are now standard throughout the country and throughout strength training.
Well, it's going to be great stuff. I can't wait to get to this. Without further ado, let's get to our big dog guest, Mike Boyle. This big dog guest this week is it back in the day actually had the opportunity to coach you. And I think that might be the first guest we've had that can make that distinction here on InTrench'd.
Not only did he coach me, he coached one of our former guests, Chris Doyle, who also went into the strength field. But, you at that point, it was probably it's up in the air whether it was coaching or experimentation. There was a lot of, Mike has influenced a lot of people. Obviously, my strength numbers went through the roof, and I'm probably built for lifting. But he also had a lot of emotional support and true guidance for a lot of us, including our executive producer over there, who's always trying to fuck something up. But Mike kept a lot of us straight, and so it goes beyond strength training. But we were at the beginning. My group was at the beginning where Mike was trying to really making a name for himself, or really kind of blazing a path in strength and conditioning.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I got to ask you, Mike, is what he's saying true about like keeping him and our executive producer, Eric Berman, in line? Are we right on that?
Honestly, I'm going to be honest as much as I can during this podcast. I didn't have to keep those guys in line much at all. They were really, truthfully, they were really committed. They wanted to be better. Part of it with me, I think what I did is I instilled some belief in them that they could be that good and that they could play and that they were going to play if they did what I wanted them to do. I really had a strong belief in myself that, hey, we can get these guys better, and particularly the guys that really want to be better. And we had some guys at that point. We had some guys that didn't want to be very good and they didn't get good. And we had some guys that wanted to be good and they got better. That's when I started to realize the simplicity of the process.
Well, it's funny because at one point in time you said to me, listen, you're never going to be 6'5". You shouldn't be 320. So, and you're never going to run laps around people. So that your pathway to playing is the weight room, getting as strong as you can be and as explosive as you can be. And at one point I almost had a step away from football because I was a little bit discouraged with how a lot of these guys that they were recruited were playing, and we weren't getting a fair shot. And my dad was saying, hey, if you're not going to get a run at this, you got to get into work. And then Mike really convinced me to stay with football. And you can say, well, that's nice. He helped you stay in the game. But think about where football has taken me at this point, Mike. So that what seemed like an insignificant thing maybe at the time was very significant because it's become my livelihood. It's the way I feed my family. So that was one of many, 1,000 times you've talked to an athlete. But in my case, it put me on a trajectory to eventually winning Super Bowls. You know what I'm saying?
But I think that's what you said. Well, I didn't view those things as insignificant at all. Like I viewed those things as really significant in the sense that I believed in certain guys. Yeah, I believed in guys who I think were worth believing in. And then part of what you realize you do, one of the things people started to realize much later on in the game, guys like Chris Doyle, is that strength coaches are often your culture creators. They're the guys that they spend more time with your athletes than the position coaches do, than the head coach does. And I wanted to create a culture of hard work and of belief in yourself and of this idea. I fought with coaches a lot about who should play and who shouldn't play based on guys who were putting in the effort. Some guys would say I was a rat because I had no problem ratting somebody out. If someone didn't do what they were supposed to do, I would let whoever was in charge know it, because the way you create a culture is through accountability. And if guys aren't showing up, I mean, I can tell you stories. I would name names, Gooch, but guys would get mad at me. But I sent guys across the street to get guys out of bed. I was literally like, go get that motherfucker, get him out of bed and get his ass here now.
Sure.
And guys walked because our dorms were literally across the street, and guys went across the street and dragged guys out of bed and dragged him in. And the guy still got in trouble because he was late for lifting. He lifted.
Yeah, but he lifted.
Like, when someone looked at me and I said, where's so-and-so? And they said, oh, he's asleep. I was like, go get him. Go right now. Go to his room, get him, drag his ass here. He's going to get his workout in. And then whatever we decide to do from a punishment standpoint, because we did, it was old school. We punished guys. Guys ran in the morning. There were consequences. And I think that's some of the stuff that we're losing, is there's a lack of consequence with people. It's one of the things I miss about college, is that I'm in the private sector now. If somebody doesn't show up, they don't show up. What am I going to do?
As long as they pay.
Yeah, they pay.
As long as they pay.
Right? Now, so you can't really do anything about that. In college, you could really create accountability for these guys. And a lot of that was, for some guys, that was a lot of life lessons in terms of, hey, get your ass out of bed and do what you're supposed to do. Get your ass out of bed and go to study hall. There were so many things, and we were lucky. We had Sally Ward, we had Maria, we had people, we had a lot of people who gave a shit.
Sure.
Lying.
Those people are also like you. They weren't afraid to ruffle some feathers and say, hey, fucker, do what you're supposed to do. You know, especially Maria in the training room, like you messed up in there. Like,
Oh yeah.
you were getting your ass ripped.
Yeah. And John Lyons used to say all the time, he goes, talking about plays, he goes, I want a guy who's give a shit meter runs really, really high. and I remembered that line forever. I say it to people all the time in terms of, because that's what I wanted. I wanted somebody who's give a shit meter ran on high as opposed to someone who didn't have one.
Well, you talk about creating a culture, and I think you're right. Listen, we spent all summer with you. You know, we were in the weight room every day during the summertime. And like I mentioned, you know, before we came on here about your family's home on the lake in Pembroke, you invited us to partake in things outside of football to keep us tight together. And, you know, I felt, and I'm sure people feel differently about it, but like even if I had to miss a day in your weight room and have to lift somewhere else, even back home where I started lifting a little bit when I was in high school, I was completely a fish out of water. Like I didn't know, I would be looking around like, what the fuck, where am I going? What am I doing? Like it was such a comfortable environment. I knew what had to be done. I knew there was somebody there coaching me, and I'm going to throw a backhanded compliment at you. It's one of my specialties.
I can't wait.
Mike is the least strength coach looking motherfucker you've ever seen in your life. But
He's nodding.
but one of the premier guys in the world. Okay. And it was obvious early on, this guy knows what he's talking about. If you just walked in, you'd say, well, there's a scientist. And then you'd look over and see some other bulked up guy and go, that must be the strength coach, when it was the reverse. Maybe the scientist was some big softy over there in the corner, you know?
No, that was when Ollie was my GA.
Yeah.
People walk right up to him, start talking to him, and he'd be like, no, over there.
That's right. He had to be the strength coach.
Up there. And people would always look. I can't tell you how many people I've met, and the first words out of their mouth was, I thought you'd be bigger.
Yes. Yes. Every place I've ever been, when the strength coach starts talking to the strength coach always wants to approach the line coach. Like somehow his job and my job have anything to do with one another. What I learned in the NFL was you don't even go down there. I don't even, whatever they do, whatever, I have my job. I teach fundamental football and I teach scheme. It's his job. And I ran into that at Boston College the last time I was there. They said, head coach said to me, how come our guys don't look as good as Syracuse's guys or Duke? And I said, well, that's the job of the guy that's in charge of big and strong. That's not my job. Talk to the big and strong coach. Don't talk to the line coach. I do pass blocking and trap blocking. That's my job. And what I think is interesting is that there's a relationship between football coaches and strength coaches that it has to be. And I had, I had to learn this as I went along. You got to stay out of people's way, and you got to trust the people that are doing they're skilled at that. I don't need the strength coach telling me how to run block. And I don't need to be telling the strength coach how to do any of that shit. And at BU, I don't know did you work for the football staff or were you working for the athletic department?
No, I was working for the athletic department, which was good. And so I was not beholding to anybody in that regard, so that I could. And I had that exact discussion. I would go in and say, I'm not here designing plays. I'm not in here telling you what scheme to run. I don't understand why. And I had this argument with all the coaches. I had it with Coach Parker at times. I had it with Mike Jarvis at times. I said, I've watched a ton of football games. I played football myself. I've watched a lot of football on the sidelines. So I have as much experience in football as you have in the weight room. So if you would like me to give you football input, I'll be really happy to do that. But you don't want me to do that. And I know that. I said, so I want you to just see the reverse of that and realize that I don't need you to I don't need to know what you did when you played. And it is amazing. Football is the number one. This is what I did when I was a player sport in terms of it. It's the most annoying sport to work with. And it is primarily for that reason, where you're dealing with coaches who say, well, when I played, I did this. And you look and think, that was at least a decade ago, probably, unless you've really rapidly transitioned into a leadership role in this football program quicker than most people. So that was always one of the most difficult things about football in general.
Yeah, well, football coaches were a little bit pig-headed, I guess you'd say.
There's
a lot of it, but you learn as you go along. Well, let's say this: you started out as an athletic trainer, Mike. I've been in places where the strength coach MF's the training staff, and the training staff MF's the strength coach. And I'm sure behind the scenes they're both MF and the football staff. I got it, because if that's going on, you know something else is going on. But that's a unique perspective for you as a strength coach, or building into that strength field, having that athletic training background.
Oh, it helped me immensely, and it was not intentional. It just, when I first went to Springfield College, obviously the Mecca, good, you know,
The
that.
Mecca, the cradle of coaches. Yeah,
Being a Lou Racca guy.
absolutely.
But, there wasn't the opportunity to be a strength coach. I was really lucky. So I don't know if you guys have read Outliers, but I always said I lived Outliers. My buddy in college, would have been my roommate my senior year, except I didn't get, I ended up getting an RA position, was Steve Spagnuolo. And my
defensive coordinator.
Oh,
for the
yeah.
Chiefs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So the guys I trained with all the throwers, and Mike Wojcik was the throws coach. The first guy I met probably at Springfield College, I walked into my dorm the first day, and there's a big guy out front. Obviously looks like he lifts weights. And we start talking to him. His name's Mike. My name's Mike. He's the dorm director. He's the field event coach for the track team. He's got every muscle and fitness, every strength and health, every Ironman in his room, cataloged in milk crates. He's also got, Gooch, you would have been happy, oldies music,
Nice.
also
Nice.
in milk crates.
Nice.
And he's got a refrigerator full of beer. And I am literally thinking, okay, I have died and gone to heaven. My dorm director loves lifting weights, loves talking about lifting weights, and very rapidly let me start hanging around with him and learning about this process of lifting weights that I was so intrigued with. But I was studying athletic training, and Mike was studying to be a track coach, and Rusty Jones was there. Same way, Rusty was there studying, they were coaching football and studying nutrition. And you just realize, wow, Dave Tobe was there. I don't know if you know Dave Tobe. He's special teams coach for, Dave was playing.
He's with the Chiefs. He's with the Chiefs as well, right?
Doug McKenney was there, who was an assistant for Rusty in Indy. There were just so many people there that were going to be, or were influential, you know, in my life or in my thought process or whatever it was. And I mean, I just was lucky. Mike Wojcik and Rusty got jobs. They got part-time strength coach jobs the year they graduated. So they were grad students. I was an undergrad student. They probably were there 2 years. So they probably graduated my junior year. Mike got a job at Syracuse as the throws coach and the football strength coach with Dick McPherson. Rusty got a job in the USFL and in the NHL. So he was working for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Pittsburgh Maulers in the old USFL. But I remember thinking, wow, this strength and conditioning thing is real. People just got jobs. And my mindset started to shift, even though I was still in athletic training. I got my master's in athletic training. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be a strength coach here somewhere down the line. I didn't know when or where, but I knew I would be.
Nice.
But I mean, it ended up taking you to founded Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning in 1996, one of the first for-profit strength and conditioning companies in the world. How did you get there? What motivated you to take that step, to take on that role, and to get into something like that?
Well, it was an interesting story. So basically, I started because they paid us so bad, training guys.
It's good motivation.
Right, good motivation, right? You're making no money. So all of a sudden, in about, good, you remember, 1990 actually was our first Final Four in hockey. First Final Four in a long time. And a string of, we went 9, I think, out of 10 years we were in the Final Four during that decade of the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to an agent about training. Then I said, I want to train some hockey players in the summer just to make some money. And I ended up getting about 10 hockey players, and about 3 or 4 of them ended up making the NHL that next year. And I told the agent, I said, I want guys that are in the American Hockey League. I don't want any NHL guys because they're not going to listen to me. I need guys that are going to come in here. I need desperate men.
Mm-hmm.
And he found me 10 desperate men. And those guys, you know, Kenny Hodge, Jeff Lazaro, Tommy Fitzgerald, I'm trying to think who else. There were a bunch of those guys who that year came out and made NHL teams. And then the next year I had more guys. And
I remember them coming in when we were training this summer. I remember them having a whole wave of, who the fuck are these guys? Oh, those are the hockey guys, you know, and not our hockey guys. Those were NHL guys, or, you know, and it was always intriguing. We never had a nowadays football only lives with football, but we never had any kind of bad interaction. It was kind of great.
Like no tension.
No,
or
it was
anything
wonderful.
Like
it was like, hey, these are elite athletes. They're in a
right.
different sport, but and then eventually you branched out to some football guys as well.
Oh yeah, we started doing combine. I started doing combine training for Brad Blank because I had Billy Brooks ended up, getting drafted and making a team. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, there were other guys who said, oh, you helped Billy. Can you help me? My friend Brad Blank, who was a really successful agent for a long time, still dabbles in it a little bit. But Brad came to me and said, hey, I'm going to bring in some like legit guys, some first round draft pick guys. And I want you to train them for the combine. So we established, I think the first residential combine camp was probably at BU in, I don't even know what year, 90. Brad would be able to tell you 90 what, but it might even have been in the 80s. I'm not even sure. But you would remember I had Eric Swan.
Yeah, I remember Eric Swan, who was playing in whatever league that was.
Played in that
like
the
a
Boston
semi-pro,
league, semi-pro league or something like
up
that.
in Lynn. I think he was playing up in Lynn, wasn't he?
And in Lynn, yeah, he was actually playing in Lynn, and he was a non-qualifier who was supposed to go to either North Carolina or North Carolina State. And I remember, I knew, I started meeting all these agents because of because I had a little bit of success with helping guys with the combine, and his agent was a guy named Dick Bell, and Dick started telling me, oh, I got a kid that's 6'3" and 320 pounds, and he can run a 4.9, and I was like, yeah, right. And I got a unicorn tied up in my backyard, and I'm gonna ride.
He might have been taller than 6'3", Mike. He was huge.
He was big. He was huge. Really big,
and was a great athlete.
And he showed up. I remember because he said he weighed. I think he said he weighed 300 pounds, and we met. Good, you'll appreciate this. We met at IHOP on Route 1.
Beautiful.
IHOP. There you go.
And what does IHOP on Route 1 have right at the front door? A big old scale. Do you remember?
Oh, that's right. Yes, the big scale. That's right.
And I literally, first thing I did to Dick, I was like, make a scale. And he stands on the scale, and he's 295. He's 19 years old. He's 295, and he does not look 295. And I always say, that's the judgment for like when you're looking at linemen, anybody who weighs more than it looks like they weigh is put together. You know what I mean? When you look at a guy and think he's 275, then he hops on the scale and he's 295, you're like, okay, this guy's got some meat on him, versus the opposite. You look at a guy and think, oh, maybe he's 285, and you look and he's, 320, and you're like, oh, he's a slob.
Yeah.
He's all,
quick. Well, I always say when I look at guys, and I talk outwardly about it, legs and ass. I mean, guy's got a good ass. If he's got that shelf, that Ronnie Stone thing, you could put a mug of beer on top of it, and those thick legs that are wearing through sweatpants because that tells me something's coming from that guy. You know what I'm saying? I don't know this other nonsense. If those things happen,
that's what
listen. I'm at the combine slapping guys in the hips and the ass to see what's inside.
Trying to get
inside the shorts. I want to
figure it out.
I want to if it's solid, I'm liking it. But I mean, I love the. It's a good gauge. I agree with you, Mike. But he was one of the first ones you had in there as a football guy.
He was one of the first ones we had, and he was the first. He was the first guy, I think, since Otis Sistrunk to not play college football and get drafted. And I don't even know if Sistrunk, he used to play for the Raiders. I don't know if he actually got drafted, but Eric got drafted in the first round. I think he was 7th or 8th overall pick, and he never played a college football game. And all of those things, because we had, ESPN was in the weight room. We were always getting these little bits of press coverage that were helping to move things along, I guess.
This is back before social media.
Right, exactly. Before social media. Yeah. When it was a big deal. I mean, getting on ESPN was a big deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you list some of these guys like Stalin Collinette and Mike Mamula from Boston College. I mean, you and I have talked about this with Mike Mamula, but you are legendary among the pro ranks because you got Mike Mamula, who was a tremendous athlete and a great physique on him, but you got him because of the combine training to be drafted in the first round. And
we got, that was a cover of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
I still have that picture in my computer somewhere, but he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And the same thing I remember, like for me, because I'm like you, right? You're a kid from Lexington. I'm a kid from Malden. And I can remember thinking like, my fucking name is in Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
Like, that was like
That's
a big
awesome.
deal. That's one of those where you go home and you tell your parents like, hey, my name is in Sports Illustrated this month. Like at that time, that was a big deal. Because like I said, there was no social media. There was really limited news outlets. So to suddenly realize, wow, I got my name in a national publication for the training that I did. And the funny thing is, people always ask me, I've never been to the combine
Really?
Really?
That's
because I was
surprising.
a college strength coach, right?
Yeah. So you had things going on.
Yeah, you got stuff going on. Like, by the time we got to the combine, I'm like, my job's done. And I'm not going to Indianapolis or wherever it was, because it wasn't always even then in Indianapolis. I'm not going to go and, hold guys' hands and then look for photo opportunities. Here, I got, we got a football team to train, and we got
Well, plus
hockey.
you're in the middle of February. You got hockey going on. You're in the heat of things.
And we're trying to, we're trying to win a national championship.
Sure.
Football, we're just, football, we're always, you're in the midst. That winter's strength training time was the next to the summer. That was your biggest chunk of time that you had with those guys. So you can't all of a sudden say, oh, I'm going to take off for a few days and go to Indy. Probably now, if that was the case, I might do it. But in those days, as you know, it was tunnel vision.
Yeah. Well,
all we were thinking about was when the next workout was, and when's the weight room open and when's it not open.
And being a football coach, I always have to explain this to people. I went to a hockey school.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I went to and I used to say Nebraska when Nebraska was good, but I went to a Notre Dame of football wise to Florida State, Miami. I went to a big time hockey school, not a big time football school. So when you say you're fighting for a national championship every year, you're in the mix for Hockey East, the Bean Pot, which you don't know nothing about.
No.
Come on, little dog. You don't know anything about the Bean Pot. All right. Syracuse guy, Mike, Syracuse guy. So he's got, he's got his own things going on over there.
There's some Northeast connections.
He's
I'm
still
aware of it. I don't know it in the way that obviously Mike or yourself.
He's still hoping that Jim Boeheim comes out of retirement.
Honestly,
So
yes.
that-
Yeah,
It's true.
But
it's the Jack Parker Invitational, as it was called for a long time.
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Don't think that my couple stints at Boston College, that I wasn't still a BU hockey fan. Now, I would support Boston College in a lot of things, but when they played BU,
Nice, your alma
and
mater.
I told them, I said, listen, I got to be honest with you. And I'm not even a hockey guy. I don't even enjoy hockey that much. I enjoyed the guys. I enjoyed the fact that they were elite level players, and I thought that was fascinating. But nonetheless, if BU and BC were going, I was BU all the way.
Have to be.
I was raised on the scarlet and white.
Oh.
It fed me. BU fed me for all those years growing up.
I was saying, my dad's in the BU Hall of Fame. I grew up. My father centered the ball to Harry Aganis, the greatest player in Boston University football history. We had Harry Aganis. We had a Harry Aganis bobblehead on our
Unbelievable.
shelf in my house.
Unbelievable. Actually, I was cleaning out my garage yesterday, and I have that great picture of Harry Aganis jumping over the top that they have hanging up in the building. I have a copy of that.
Yeah.
And it's, not to mention, I did my student teaching at Malden High School, okay, where Mike went.
Right,
and his
right.
dad was he the principal, correct?
He was the principal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was the principal. His name's on the wall in the gym. So to me, I kind of came up also under the watchful eye of a Springfield College guy and Lou Racca, my line coach in high school. So, all this is interconnected. Mike's not just a passing strength coach, which I've had a lot as I've coached. There's a lot of web
Yeah.
that goes with
It's
me
all
and Mike.
connected.
Oh yeah. Well, listen, I used to wear my Body by Boyle shirt proudly. Then there was a period of time, including now, where he doesn't want Body by Boyle strapped to this. And Mike, I understand it's marketing. In the day of social media, the last thing you need is me walking around with a Body by Boyle shirt. However, there's a lot worse characters that played during that time. But I wore it around. I would listen, for a short, fat kid from Lexington, I held my own in a weight room.
I missed Billy Ty, I think, by 1 year at Malden High, actually.
Billy Ty, my high school coach.
His high school
Okay,
football
A
coach.
legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Coached till he was 80 something, right?
Yeah, actually, he coached past 90, believe it or not. He was he wasn't a head coach,
Amazing.
but he was an assistant past 90. Yeah, he couldn't
But
stop.
we do have a lot of we have a deep connection.
Did your dad play with him at BU? Because I know that he was at BU. It must have been just before.
I think he was just after, because my father was post-war. So it was funny. My father, the reason I got hired, pure nepotism. My father played with John Simpson. My
John
father played
Simpson,
with John
yeah.
Simpson and Dick Fecto.
Yep.
Were both on my father's team.
Two legends, two BU guys who were there till they were ready to retire as well.
John was the athletic director when I got an athletic training job Maria's first year Maria Hutzik's first year as head athletic trainer. I was an assistant athletic trainer. And then I quit. I literally quit after 6 months and told them I was going to be the strength coach. And they were like, we don't have a strength coach. And I was like, you do now.
You're like, perfect.
You told
And I
them.
walked-
They didn't tell you. You
Yeah,
told
that's-
them.
I literally walked across the hall because at that time we had about a 600 square foot weight room right across the hallway from
Yep.
the
The locker room, our training room.
training room. Yeah, it was the locker room, right? It was
Yeah,
like the
remember I had I had a row of metal lockers there. All the walk-ons. Ox and I used to dress in the hallway right by the showers. That
Yeah.
weight room was right behind it. What a
Yeah.
junk hole. Yeah.
Yeah, and that I literally walked over there, and I think I probably just sat down with like a yellow legal pad and a pencil, and when people came in, I was the strength coach. And one of the first guys to walk in, Rick Pitino,
Really?
Nice. Yeah. Rick
Yeah.
Pitino.
basketball coach at
Yeah,
that
of course.
Yeah.
at BU. And he didn't hire me. He would have, but he left and went to Providence. And his assistant, John Custo, was the first guy that actually hired me. He said, will you run our basketball preseason program for free? Because we don't have any money to pay you. And I absolutely, I can't wait to do that. I think the second guy that came walking in was Dave Silk from the '80 Olympic team.
Nice. Yeah.
Kind of strolled in one day and was talking to me about training for hockey and wanting to go to Europe and play hockey. I mean, BU, like when you talk about, and we had think about this was before you basketball wise, but that year, Rick Pitino was the head coach. Our point guard was Brett Brown, who ended up coaching the 76ers.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Our off guard was Sean Teague, who's George Teague, and I can't think of the other Teague brother but their dad.
Nice.
I mean, we had a little bit of everything going on at that time in terms of we had these hockey guys around, we had the '80 Olympic team guys walking around, we had football coaches who were going to go on to the NFL walking around. That's why I'm very forward with people in terms of I tell them when you're young and starting out, assume everybody's going to be important at some point in your life because you have no idea who anybody is going to be. Because if people had told me, if people had said to me that, oh yeah, Tim Murphy and Sean McDonald will become institutions in New England coach, right? Well, I do honestly, when I first met, I don't think
I hear you.
that would have been a bet that I would have taken, right? If someone had said those guys are going to go on to amazing head coaching careers, 20 years at their school, legends, Hall of Famers, I would have been like, I don't know, come on, if they'd said to me Tony Sparano was going to go on and become a head coach in the NFL, I don't know if I would have believed that at the time when
He was wearing those untied high top turf shoes in the weight room with the laces, the tongue hanging out.
And the sleeves cut off his shirt and the big Italian flag on the arm.
Yeah, he didn't look like a NFL head coach.
Did not look like head coach material to me at that time. We'll have to say that.
Yep.
But what you realize is that you don't know what you don't know when you look at Murph literally is a legend
At Harvard.
At Harvard.
Yep.
Buddy Teevens on that staff. Buddy Teevens, legend at Dartmouth. They just named the stadium after him. I mean, Sean McDonald, legend at UNH.
And Sean was a young guy at that time when he was at BU. He was still rip roaring back in the day, and he's become an elder statesman around New Hampshire. I mean, he is.
Funny part about Sean, he used to bring me his UNH guys to train for combine and for pro days, and he used to bring Chip Kelly down with him.
Yeah.
Which Chip was his offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Chip and Sean are still really tight, but Chip was working for Sean, which is you think about that and you think, wow.
It's amazing the amount of people that have gone through there. And of course, you always mention Mike Jarvis as a basketball coach as well.
Oh yeah,
who went on to have great success in a number of places.
Yep, St. John's.
Yeah, big name.
George Washington.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like I said, you just realize you're living in this outliers world where you're surrounded by all of these people who are going to be amazingly successful, and you got to be paying attention and kind of keep your head up and keep your head on a swivel and think, what am I learning from anybody on any given day? That stuff's really going to make a big difference.
Yeah, Mike, I wanted to ask you because we were talking a lot about the combine training. What was it kind of like a one size fits all in terms of your plan, or would it go person by person, or kind of what went into preparing somebody for the combine?
Well, actually, it's funny. I just had this conversation with Billy Brooks yesterday. The thing about the combine is they test everybody the exact same way. So it was very much one size fits all. The only thing that didn't happen basically is that quarterbacks and receivers didn't have to bench 225 for reps, but everybody else had to do. You think about the incongruity of all this. Everybody has to do an endurance upper body test, and the bigger and stronger you are, the more it's an endurance upper body test. It's kind of silly in terms of if you're a 225-pound linebacker and you can bench 225 20 times, you're really, really strong. If you're a 320-pound lineman and you can bench 225 20 times, you're not all that strong.
That's right.
But everybody still had to do it. So you had to get ready for it. And everybody had to run the 40. Everybody had to do a vertical jump. Everybody had to initially, whatever, 5-10-5, whatever you want to call it, short shuttle.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was doing the same stuff. So we were pretty much getting those guys ready, because I used to always look at it, and now guys do all this positional drills and all this stuff, which I think is a lot of window dressing bullshit, to be honest with you. Because if you're going to teach the guy how to play football, how to look like a football player in the last 6 weeks, you're in serious trouble.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get the guy ready for these really specific tests, and you can make a huge impact, and we did. I mean, we made a massive impact on guys. We would routinely have the top performers in the vertical jump, in the shuttle, in the 40, in all of these things, because we drilled them. I think in the Sports Illustrated article years ago, I said that this is so simple in terms of, it's like an admissions test, except they tell you the questions. And it's like, okay, there's going to be 8 questions, and you got to get above X on all 8. And I would tell the guys all the time, it's not like you can win the bench press and get drafted in the first round. What guys are going to look for is they're going to look for someone who's really well-rounded. So they used to look at stuff and say, okay, your 20-yard shuttle has to be 0.5 seconds below your 40, or you don't move well side to side. The guys knew that. The combine guys were smart enough very early on to realize, hey, this guy might be able to, he might be blazing straight ahead, but he can't move side to side. And obviously football, a lot of side to side. So there are all these things that they were looking at. And it was kind of like, if you can run this fast, if you can run a 4.4, then you better jump 35. And if you're a lineman and you can't do 20 reps in the bench press, people are going to say you're not strong enough. So we knew what everybody needed to do, but everybody, we event trained. We trained like it was training for the decathlon. We knew the events, and we spent weeks training for the events.
Hey, listen, it worked for a lot of guys. And
it worked to the point where everybody copied what we did, which is crazy. If you look at what everybody does now, it all started at BU in the late 80s, early 1990s.
And this is why he's a legend.
That's
I'm telling you, the guy brought strength coaching. I always talk about like Boyd Epley at Nebraska. Okay. The only reason I remember that name is because you talked about some of the aspects they did there, explosive Olympic training, hang clean, stuff like that. And we had some of the charts on the walls, but we all know how that kind of is over there. But really, he was a name in one particular, football training, whatever. Mike kind of created a whole different genre of strength training. A little of this, a little of that, a little of this team, that team. Now we're talking combine development, get guys spotlighted to be drafted. Ultimately, as a coach, I'm going to the film. Like all the drills, you talk about the drills, and I participated with the drills. The only reason I like to get on the field during the combine was I wanted to be around them. I wanted to bust balls, and I wanted to see how they reacted to that. I wanted to jump somebody's ass for not stepping on the line, and I wanted to see what kind of interaction, whether they were a little puss and wanted to give me the me, check him off the list. I don't want to fucking deal with that guy, that type of stuff. But the exercises, and we'd go into these prep rooms to say, to kind of divvy out who's doing what of these little drills that we were doing. And we were put on tape from 20 years ago. Well, this is what they've been doing. So to get it changed, you needed 30 of the teams to kind of agree that we're going to change that one particular drill. So a lot of the drills have been done since the beginning of time, even though they're useless.
Oh yeah. And they've just added more useless stuff. I mean, to me, honestly, I'd go in there and it would be like, let's run the 40, let's do a vertical jump, let's do the direction change drill, and we'll bench press the stronger guys, but we'll do a relative strength test in terms of we'll figure out something that gives us, that we're not getting 20 reps, so 30 reps or 40 reps, something stupid like that. And then be done and go home. Because a lot of the other stuff is a waste of time.
Yeah, and I like the when they filmed them. I'll tell you two things I really liked, and I would go when they did it in the morning after they did their skill stuff. When they did their squat, where they would just squat down and show their flexibility, the hips, the knees, the ankle. I wanted I wanted to see them go down and then come back up without being bent at the waist and wobbling and all. I just want to see that kind of flexibility, that balance. And then they literally walk right past me with nothing but spandex on, and I could see the body composition. They're not under anything. I could see whether there was any muscles in the shoulders or the neck. What do the legs really look like? They're not in sweatpants. They're not on a practice field. So it seems kind of almost weird, but part of that to me was important that I know what they look like.
Why was that? Why was that important?
Well, because listen, I got to coach these guys, and you're constantly, if a guy's a fat guy, you're going to be dealing with back problems, you're going to be dealing with potential injuries, balance problems, falling down at practice, hurting someone else. Guys always getting something going on, maybe having to worry about weights, making weight every week in the NFL, and them getting fined and being pissed about it. There's a lot of things that, and then there's a durability factor. And one of the things, Mike, that came up when I was at the Colts was the focus was from that general manager was the lean muscle mass as opposed to height and weight. What's his, guy could be 320 and be 40% fat and then be 320 and be 18% fat. Now, which one do you want? Of course.
Yeah. And but I remember we were doing that. We were doing body fats. If you can remember, we were calculating.
You had the calipers, Mike, back in the day.
Yeah, we had calipers and we were calculating Lewis formulas. Basically looking at vertical jumps and body weights.
I have no idea what Lewis formulas are, Mike. What's a Lewis formula? I forget.
Yeah.
It's basically, it's a power output formula. And basically what it looks at is how well do you move your body mass? So you would look at it and say, okay, like if you were 280 and you had a 30-inch vertical, then there's a formula that you could put 280 and 30 into, and it would give you a power number. You could tell who your most powerful guys were. And they do that now in running. They've called it, they call it truck stick. That's become the fancy name for it, but it's basically a power indicator. You take a guy's flying 10-yard time, and then you multiply that times his body weight. So you get a time in meters and a body weight in kilograms, and you multiply it out. And basically, I read a study one time at the combine that they said if you're drafting, you draft the highest number that you can at that position, because that tells you the person that moves their mass the fastest. Because that's collision, right? If you get a guy like, you're talking about, and it may be a guy who's carrying some fat, that's fine. One you want to know, obviously the closer you are to the ball, the more fat you can carry probably safely. You can probably live with an offensive lineman who's in the mid 20s, but you can't live with anybody else on your team in the mid 20s.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a defensive guy. You can't have, your skill guys have probably got to be a sub 10. But it's all that stuff matters, but it's really looking at it relative to speed and relative to vertical jump that matters in terms of it's like horsepower, right? Power per pound is what you're really looking at for people and wanting to look at for people.
Well, Mike, it's when I'm dealing with these pro athletes, there's so many different shapes and sizes, so many different body types, and each guy, there's certain players in the NFL right now that are so gifted that they could eat McDonald's every day and still perform at a high level. Now, they probably would perform better if they didn't. But then there are other guys that need to take every little bit into consideration just to stay afloat. What they eat, how much they sleep, their rest and recovery, all those things. How do you determine which guys can afford to do one thing and which guys can't? Well,
honestly, I don't think you do determine that. I think you try to hold all of them to the highest standard that you can, knowing that you're probably going to have the odd Lawrence Taylor who's doing, kind of everything that they're not supposed to be doing and still is the most dominant guy in the field. But in general, I feel like your job is to influence everybody in the direction of taking the best care of themselves that they can. And that's one of the things that I would always emphasize to guys is how many millions of dollars this is worth. If you can get another year, and that's what we're looking at here is I trained a lot of pro hockey guys I think I trained Jay Pandolfo for 17 summers.
That's crazy.
And I'd always think like, hey, the goal is to go back and get paid again. The goal is to stay relevant, right? And that's the difference. It's no different in the NFL, but the career length is incredibly short because guys don't realize that. We talked about that a little bit off camera the other day, but I think the NFL is probably the worst league for guys getting incredibly complacent, incredibly fast, and not. I think people complain now about the injury rates and the OTAs and the lack of offseason program, but we rarely see NFL guys around training anymore. It's really, I mean, I can't tell you the last time I had an NFL guy show up at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. And I can't tell you the last time I had an NFL strength coach call me and say, hey, I got a guy that lives in the Boston area and I'd love to have him with you. When I worked for the Red Sox, so I was with the Red Sox 2 years, 2012, 2013. First thing I did in 2012 was start trying to figure out where guys train. What are they? Where are they in the offseason? Who are they with? Are they with somebody competent? Are they with somebody capable? And if I'd done a couple of Zoom calls for NFL strength staffs. And that was one of the first things I said is that I would be adamant about finding a place, where are they in the off season and who are they with? Can I get them with someone that's going to help me with programming, with accountability, with getting this guy to continue to do the things that he needs to do. So the guy doesn't show up and tear his ACL, doesn't show up and tear his Achilles, whatever it is. Because when I read an article one time about a guy who started MMA fighting in the off season. If you think about the dumbest possible thing that you could do, I would probably say MMA fighting might be one, maybe serving as a human target at a rifle range. But other than that, and I think there was an article, it was like in ESPN magazine or something about so-and-so is taking up MMA fighting in the off season. And I'm thinking, if I'm paying that guy, I am telling him absolutely without question, he cannot do that. And I'm trying to obviously influence him. If I'm a general manager, I'm a position coach, I'm a strength coach, whatever it is, I want to know where that guy is.
Well, I think a lot of and I'm kind of going off of the 2011 CBA, but they've taken a lot of things out of the contracts now, where they used to be able to put certain training bonuses up so many days there, and they've eliminated those to not put pressure on the players to be there. But it has only hurt the players, and it's I believe a lot has to do with these OTA, the reduction of contact in the OTAs. And I use a line that you said to me many years ago: if you want to be a better runner, you got to run. And I believe if you want to be a better blocker, you need to block somebody. You can't mimic that. You can't do funsy things against a wall. Like, you have to be able to do the activity, do that,
like physically blocking,
physically doing something in order to become better at it. And that's why you see the play of offensive line jump up exponentially at the end of a season, because they're having week after week, they're actually doing it. Whereas all the lead up to the off season and into preseason, they're barely touching one another. So I think a lot of it's been negotiated out of the contract, and guys are taking it to the extreme. The smart players, like you say, they make sure they get it done so they have longevity.
Yeah. And it's funny, the union really in that case is not serving the player, because the union is making sure that they have a member for 3 years and that member has a lot of freedom. But that member doesn't make a lot of money, and that member doesn't have great career longevity.
Well, the thing about the union, let's be honest, they know there's another crop of them coming up right afterwards. There's always going to be the same amount of guys and the same salary cap. Somebody's getting the money, and they're going to get their dues no matter which guy pays them. So they don't have to keep guys in the league.
If I'm in charge, same thing. I'm trying to help guys find places to train. I'm trying to make guys understand the importance of training. They say, if you want to stick around, not for long, right? That's what NFL stands for. I mean, and the reason is that people say, oh, guys they get worn out, they get beat up. No, they get rich and they get complacent. And the last thing you want your financial curve to look like is this, where the peak is at 23 or 24.
Yeah. And that steep drop off. Yeah. I mean,
exactly. Drop off from, you're talking about they're talking about 0 to 60 on a car, 60 to 0.
Yeah.
You go from You go from making $1 million to making $0.
Do you think that's where that complacency comes from? Is because they've finally been paid? Like they put in all this training. We talked about the combine and getting to that level, and then they get paid, and that's kind of it. Do you think that's where it comes from?
Yeah, that's absolutely where it comes from. But part of that too is on the agents. I think the agents, I can remember I kind of watched that change over my career too, in terms of agents used to be much better about almost forced savings. I can remember, actually, this is a great story. Brad Blank's financial guy was a guy named Jerry Klingman. Jerry was great, super responsible. Brad had a client whose name I will not mention because he's still very active in the media. And he was spending money like it was going out of style. And Jerry fired him as a client. Jerry called him up and said, "You're going to be broke and you're going to want to blame somebody, and I don't want it to be me." And he told him to take his money to another money manager. And I remember thinking, that's a guy who gets it.
Mm-hmm.
But there aren't enough of those guys. There aren't enough character guys. There aren't enough character people in any business. So it's not unique to the agent world or the football world or the financial advising world or whatever it is. But this same guy, Jerry Klingman, told me one time that guys should live on 10% of what they make the first year. And they can up that by 10% every year they go longer in the league. So if you get to 5 years, you could safely live on 50% of what you're making. Okay. But he said, because, after taxes, and he had it all figured out. He said, the only way to make this sustainable, you make $1 million, you live on $100,000 that first year, you invest $400,000 because you're going to get about 500,000 of the million when you start, in the after tax world. You get another $1 million the second year, you can live on $200,000, and then you can invest $300,000 of the remainder that you get. But by the time the end of that 5-year contract is done, you've invested well over $1 million over that 5-year period, and you're probably on your way to having $2 million.
But I don't think athletes see beyond they think those checks are coming forever.
Right, exactly.
They don't realize. I mean, I had a guy, Mike, you'd appreciate this. I had a guy who, I will leave him nameless. He had it in his contract that if he missed weight 2 times in a row, it would cost him $250,000. And I heard him 2 days before the weigh-in talk about eating pizza, having a pizza party. I called his wife because I said, I can't allow this to happen. He'd already missed it once. She didn't know that this was in the contract until I told her. And he came back in the next day and he was sore. And he's like, "Coach, you called my wife?" And I'm like, "Bro, I can't sleep at night knowing that you're going to piss away $250,000 over pizza. It's not worth it. Somewhere down the road, you're going to need $250,000.
I mean, $250,000. I mean, I know in the world of athletes, professional athletes, that doesn't sound like a lot, but come on, that for pizza?
Those checks don't come forever. And then you get the guys like, the high level, high name guys that make $20 million a year, and they probably can do whatever they need to do. But majority of the guys aren't that. They don't have that.
Right. No, and they need a really good financial advisor. They need to understand finances. So many of these guys are not, obviously education is not a priority even through college for a lot of these kids. And then they get into a situation where they get far too much money and they don't get shown how to handle that money, how to manage that money, what the long-term plan should be for that money. And it's a travesty when you see the number of these guys. I don't know if you've ever read Tony Dungy's book, Quiet Strength.
I've only read part of it.
I've heard,
finished it. Really good.
Okay.
Because he goes through the stats. The stats are, and I have if I had time, I'd pull them up in my computer, but the stats are staggering about ex-NFL players and bankruptcies and divorces. Staggering to the point where it's amazing that they haven't dealt with it in some way better than what they're doing right now. But
yeah. Well,
the reality is they haven't.
There's a lot of things that come up on the financial stuff that it shocks me that the NFL won't let you as a coach or as an organization deal with the players because the NFLPA won't allow you. They're men, treat them like men, let them do what they want to do. But let me do this, Mike. Can I jump to something? Because I think what people don't realize is you train at your facility. Now, not only do you do your BU hockey, right? But you've been with the Bruins, you've been with the Red Sox, but you train young athletes, scholastic kids, as well as people that are older. How do you kind of go to the spectrum of training these, all this range from elite athletes in the middle to retirees to young kids coming up.
I think the concepts are always the same in terms of it. So if you came in, I always said, if we sat and just talked about training, you would realize that, okay, everybody, for us, right? Everybody needs to foam roll. Everybody needs to stretch. Everybody needs to do some type of dynamic warm up. Everybody needs to push something. Everybody needs to pull something. Everybody needs to do something for their legs. Now I need to figure out what's appropriate for a beginner at 11 years old. What's appropriate for somebody at 65 at my age, and then what's best practices for an athlete who's playing professionally. And there's even different sites. So I say there's a difference between people that are making it and that are under contract and people that are trying to make it. I would treat them differently in terms of, if I get someone who's got a big contract, I'm going to be way more conservative with the big contract person than I am with someone who's saying, hey, I'm hoping to get a contract. The guy who's hoping to get a contract, we always talk about the idea of it's kind of risk reward, right? And the training might be slightly more aggressive with somebody who wants a contract and slightly less aggressive with somebody who has a contract. So it's not all that markedly different. I think the biggest thing, we talked about kids, the biggest thing with kids is that parents are well-intentioned. Parents are the problem all the time. Like coach of the pro. No, 100% of the time, parents are the problem. And parents, I always say this, I did a whole series on youth training years ago. And one of the things that I talked about was that for a parent to get good at something in their field, they need laser focus, right? They need to be, if I want to be a great doctor or a great lawyer or whatever it is, I need to really focus in on those things. For a kid, it is the polar opposite. If I get a kid, so again, if you said to me, I got a kid and he's going to be a big kid and I think he could be an NFL lineman, I would be like, that's great. Have him try quarterback, have him try tight end, have him try running back, because you don't want to get typecast as a lineman in Pop Warner football at age 8. I didn't even want you playing. I would go like the Teddy Bruschi and some of the New England guys didn't have their kids play contact football till high school because they were worried about the concussion thing, which is another whole discussion. But I would want my kid to be the best athlete that he could be, and then realize, because you guys know this, right? When you think, Chris probably talked about it at Iowa, what would they do? They'd take a guy and they'd try to grow him into a position. So maybe they'd take a guy who was a tight end and say, okay, we're going to grow this guy into a left tackle. Miami was famous for doing that with their guys, moving them down, right? We're going to, our DNs, we're going to get big and we're going to make them D tackles, and our outside linebackers, we're going to get them big and we're going to make them D ends, and our safeties, we're going to get them big and we're going to make them linebackers, right? You want to be the best athlete that you can possibly be.
And you bring up another point, and I think that it's years ago, and we talked about this the other day, years ago, kids played 3 sports in high school. And now it's, like you said, it's probably down to 2 sports if they can do 2 sports and things like that. But I think one of the things that Bill Ty used to say, why are we doing why do you want us playing the sport in every season? And to him it was, and I used this when I was recruiting a college as a college coach, competitive people want to compete. It didn't matter what they did. They could be throwing a stick against the wall with their buddies. You could catch them at recess throwing a stick against the wall. Like, the competitive guys will compete doing anything. Who could throw a tennis ball the furthest? Who could, ricochet it off the wall? Like, whatever it is. And I think some of that gets drawn away when you pigeonhole kids into one sport. I think multi-sport kids kind of have a more competitive edge. They know what it's like to be able to do, have to compete all the time, year round.
And they develop a broader range of skills.
Yes.
Because initially that's what you want. You want everybody should have the ability to strike an object, whether it's shoot a hockey puck or hit a baseball or whatever it is. Everybody should be able to throw. Everybody should be able to catch. Everybody should be able to jump. Everybody should be able to run. Because you think, like, for years, that's what the combine was about, right? Finding the athlete, if we find an athlete, and some guys did that to a fault. They took athletes and thought they could make them into football players and realized they were wrong. It's probably too late after college, but it is not too late in elementary school. It's not too late in middle school. I think post middle school, you're probably going to have to pick 2 sports. That's probably the reality of things the way they are right now. But even then, at those 2 sports, you should probably be one of the best in your school. I can remember going through it with my daughter, who was a real good athlete, played, got a full scholarship at college to play ice hockey, played a year of professional hockey as in the women's league a couple years ago. But I made her play soccer. And she would always be like, Dad, I don't like soccer. I don't want to play soccer. I said, I don't care. You're going to get out in the spring and you're going to run. You're going to get out in the fall and you're going to run and you're going to kick. And she was the best scorer and she was the best goalie. And she'd play in goal. And if they were down 1-0, they'd take her out of goal and they'd put her at forward. But she was just a better athlete. And she was a better athlete because we made her do athletic things as a kid. We made her go to swimming. We made her go to diving. We made her go to judo. And people always say, you can't make your kids. And I'm thinking, yeah, you can. You can and you should. And people always say, oh, but my kid, all he likes is baseball. All he likes is football. And I'm like, what if he said, all I like is Coke? all I like is weed. Like why all of a sudden, like you suddenly allow this kid, like you abdicate your parenting ability to this child. And usually you abdicate it because the child is liking something that you wanted them to like. And you're secretly happy about it. And so then you use that as your defense. So that's all he wants to do, or that's all she wants to do. And the reality is like, I look at kids, like, I don't know if you ever had any experience. I trained Michael Schofield for a while, who bounced around the league for 10 years. But Michael Schofield, he ran the high hurdles in outdoor track his senior year before he going to Michigan, right? I mean, he was amazing. I used to look at the kid and think, to see a big person, a 315-pound guy run the way that he ran, you were kind of like, it was freaky. But he was an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was an athlete, it allowed him. I mean, he was never a great NFL player, but he was a starter. He started on a bunch of teams. He played. He lasted 10 years in the league. But I saw over and over again the guys, the best guys that I saw were athletes in every situation. When I was at the Red Sox, same situation. There were very few of those guys who weren't great multi-sport athletes. We had this guy, one of my favorite guys was a guy named John Lackey, who was a pitcher for us. I loved John Lackey. And John Lackey, I asked him one time, I said, I don't know how he even got on the subject. We were talking about football, and he was talking about how he played quarterback. And I said something about pitching in high school. And he's like, oh, I didn't pitch in high school. He said it was too hard to pitch and play quarterback. He said, so I didn't start pitching until junior college.
Wow.
And then you realize Jacob deGrom didn't start pitching until college. It's amazing how if you scratch under the surface of so many of these great athletes, you find stories other than the story that people tell you, other than the story that guys running a baseball facility or, running a football camp tells you. So I just think it's got to be athleticism first. And then we can go on to the whole idea. High school 7-on-7, worst thing that's ever happened to linemen, right?
It's terrible. They get forgotten. Right? They're forgotten.
Yeah, fuck, who cares?
Yeah.
7-on-7.
Well, you have an example of what you're talking about that we had at Boston U, Mike Grable.
Mike Grable
played basketball.
Mike Jarvis traded him. Nothing.
This guy was
I think a pair of gym shorts and 2 old socks, I think, was the trade.
Well, yeah, hey, that's for a lot. That's a lot, because to get a pair of socks from Al Secoyan out of the equipment room was a big deal. So the socks were like gold now. But no, that Mike Grable it wasn't even a starter at DeMatha High School in Maryland. He was on the team at Boston U, kept fouling, couldn't get it done. Trades him away to Mike, and within a couple years, he's playing for the Cleveland Browns.
Hey, how about it?
Yeah, and played a number of years. Now he played tackle, an offensive tackle from a.
He just called me the other day, by the way. Speaking of that,
did he?
Strangely, yes. I got to call him. I got to call him back. I have a voicemail from Mike Grable. I haven't talked to him.
He was probably nibbling on squirrel that he shot.
He is actually an active farmer. He said I'd have to call him because he has an active farm.
Yes,
Mike Grable was the perfect example of that in terms of a guy that, like, literally. He did not play a high school football game ever. And then came to BU and I think switched over maybe his sophomore year. And I don't think really played for us until almost his senior year.
Has a great picture of him. Now he's 6'7" maybe?
Yeah, 6'6".
And then me. Side by side. There. I was playing next to him, and it was like they called it Ike and Mike, but it was unbelievable. But he was a skinny guy. But to see this guy hang clean at his size, snap that thing, get in a hole and be able to take it out of there was amazing. But that's a great example of an athlete that you kind of turned into. And that's really kind of what they did at Iowa with Chris. He took a lot of those kind of body types and said, hey, You know, when he was on with us, he talked about taking quarterbacks as one of his guys that was a quarterback in high school was a starting guard for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, you know, you take those kind of athletes. Let me ask you this, Mike.
One more great example.
Yeah.
Sorry, but Jeff Oliver, running back, all-state running back.
Get out of here.
He was a running back. He was the tailback in high school. And Tom Coughlin recruited him to BC, and they moved him to guard. And same thing, went on, played a couple of years, played 2 years in the NFL.
Yep. That's all, just 2? I thought he played more than that.
I think only 2. I think he only had 2 years in the NFL, and I think 2 years in the beginning of the World League. So I think he probably had 4
right.
years.
He played in the World League. Yes, I remember
Barcelona,
that.
Barcelona Dragons.
Barcelona Dragons. Mike, how young? How young?
Yeah, how young? I mean, you talk about with the athlete portion of it, but what about like strength training? What
11.
age? 11.
11?
Okay.
Why 11?
No magic number. I think at 11, particularly with boys, you start to have enough attention span for it to be beneficial and doable. I think prior to 11, if you're trying to train your kids prior to 11, you're probably an asshole, to be honest with you. Like I hate to say, you're seriously, you're probably like a big time wannabe who wants to have a kid who's a stud. You know what I mean? And because your kid at 10 really wants to like ride his bike and go to birthday parties and play with his friends, and that stuff's all okay. Like there's nothing wrong with having a normal, well-adjusted child who's not tortured by his father's lack of career. And but I think at 11, you start to approach that point of getting cut, right? And you start to try to connect the dots with kids like, hey, if you want to be good at something, you're going to have to work at it. And I've just always felt like 11 is the right time for that, particularly with boys. Girls, you can start a little earlier because they mature sooner and they're much easier to work with. But you probably never had the pleasure. But if you've ever tried to train 10-year-old boys, well, I can't, there's a lot of words I can't use anymore, but it's not an enjoyable experience most of the time because they lack the maturity to really be able to do a lot of this stuff, particularly if you've got them in groups.
Mike, it's the reason when
11 is perfect.
When I got my teaching certification coming out of BU, I specifically didn't get K through 5. And my advisor was like, "What? Why not just finish it off? Why go 5 through 12?" And I said, "Because I am not going to teach those kids.
Yeah, I can't.
I can't do it. I couldn't do it. You know, I mean, I felt I could do middle school and high school because they have some attention span, a little bit more, but I couldn't do the young ones. So I understand what you're saying there.
Like young kids under the age of 11, they should be having fun.
Yeah.
And I have no problem, go to gym class, run around, go do obstacle courses, this stuff. But formalized training to me doesn't make a lot of sense because then now you got 11, 12 where you can start there's something now called long-term athletic development that's become very popular just in the whole kind of Olympic sports world. But they talk about the first phase being learn to train. And so you get these kids at 11, 12, and now you're in that learn to train phase. I can start teaching you how to do a squat, how to do a clean, how to do a bench press, how to do a chin up, all these things that you're going to need they're going to be the initial building blocks of what we want to do going forward. You've probably seen, like if you watch the videos of my son's really strong for a 180-pound lacrosse player. But the only reason he's really strong for a 180-pound lacrosse player is because he started training when he was 11 years old. And he went twice a week for 9 years. And the end result is that he's pretty strong, particularly relative to his body weight. So if you start at 11, you got plenty of time. There's a really good book called Movement Over Maxes that I like, it's actually written by a baseball guy named Zach DeCant from TCU. But one of the points that he makes in the book is that what you really want to do is just layer workouts in on top of each other. So like when my kids started working out, the goal was we're never going to stop. We're going to lift 2 days a week from the time you go to middle school to the time you graduate high school. And both of my kids probably did that. They probably missed we'd go on vacation and we'd find a gym to go to. I would know someplace, like my kids have trained at Exos. My kids have trained all over the place because we'd be like, yeah, we're going to get a lift in while we're on vacation. So
thanks, Dad. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, right. But you can shift to being that type of parent when the kid's 14 or 15. I remember saying to my son one time, I said, the time, because I go, oh, yeah, we really have to do this. I said, well, the moment you tell me that you don't care, that you don't want to play varsity hockey, that you don't want to play varsity lacrosse, we'll stop. If you say to me, Dad, I'm a recreational athlete, I really don't care. And he's like, no, that's not it. I said, well, let's go, get in the car.
That's right. You answered the question.
Yeah. You answered the question. And the question is that you at least apparently right now still give a shit. So if you do, then we're going to work out. But talk about great athlete. He made the golf team his senior year. He just took up golf his junior year. Senior year, he tears his ACL. Actually, takes up golf his sophomore year. Tears his ACL his junior year. At the end of his ACL rehab, he decides he's a good enough golfer to make the high school golf team and decides he's going to try out, which I thought was ridiculous. And he made the golf team. But
that is athletic.
But you know what I mean? But that's what you want. Raise your kids to be athletes. And then they'll find their sport. If you told me my son was going to find lacrosse, I would have been very surprised, truthfully. But he rapidly showed an aptitude for lacrosse that he did not have in other sports. He was very, very quickly as good as and then better than other kids his age. And it kind of it was obvious to him, like, okay, he liked hockey better. If you'd asked him, would you rather play college hockey or college lacrosse? He probably would have said college hockey. But unfortunately, he had to find someone else who believed that.
Makes sense. I mean, you start to talk about that and you go down that road, whether it's kids, professionals, any walk of life, this kind of topic of work versus maybe overwork. So I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm a big underwork guy. I think, it's funny because like the David Goggins stuff has become really popular and this sort of, self-flagellation that people go through. It doesn't need to be hard at all. It's just like we talk about with kids. It needs to be consistent. And consistency will beat all other things over a long period of time. That's like our adult business. We have an incredible adult business at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. And now it's our core business. It was totally unintentional, but it's our core business. We make more money or generate more revenue from adults than from anything else that we do. And it's just by being consistent. We have a good program and we get people to do it on a consistent basis. Overwork only gets you hurt. If you're constantly hurt, you're doing something wrong. And again, I'm like the king of common sense in terms of so much of this stuff is so incredibly simple, but people just fail to grasp the simplicity of these things.
Well, that brings me to the single leg theory.
Yeah, I mean, Guj was telling me about this, and I did a bit of research on this as well. This single leg philosophy. What is that all about?
Well, think of again, simplicity, right? I always used to say to people, how many legs do you run on at one time?
That always got me because that is so fucking.
But like, I don't get. But like, what do you?
What you do everything on one leg, but you don't do anything on two legs.
It's like, you're not a rabbit, right? Like if you look at ambulation, you're constantly moving in legs in opposition. It's the way the body moves.
Unless,
okay, now I get. Okay.
Unless you're sitting on the shitter, you need both legs to make
that makes sense.
That's we used to talk about it because the line coaches used to always like, no, but we gotta do this. And then I'd say, show me how you block this. And they'd show me the steps. And I'm like, single leg, single leg, single leg, single leg, right? Step here, step here, step here. At no point, the old fire out off two legs and knock the guy in his ass, right? That's not football.
Nope.
No one teaches that technique. So I look at football coaches. That's why I always was able to convince football coaches, because one thing I wrote an article one time called Learning to Speak Coach. And I used to say to people, you got to be able to talk to the person in the language they understand. And the example that I used, it would be like going to Spain and insisting on speaking English to everybody, even though they didn't understand. That's how a lot of strength coaches, right? A lot of strength coaches are that way in terms of they can't speak to the coach. So I would watch practice. I would talk to coaches. I would figure out, okay, like what's important to this guy. And then I can remember, you'd watch guys, O-line play, right? How many times did I watch that kick step, guys going backwards, right? I'm like, okay, going backwards matters here. We get guys, they got to move. If guys that can move backwards good tend to be good pass blockers, right? Guys that can move forward good tend to be good run blockers. So what do I need? Well, I need a guy who can move backwards and move forward. You definitely don't move backwards off 2 legs, and you definitely don't move forward off 2 legs. Then you get into stuff like spinal loading. The one thing that we realized, said, Guj, you'll remember back school, right? We had back school, and back school was all the guys with bad backs who was hurting through our lifting program that Maria was trying to fix. And
Not true. They were just soft. They were just soft motherfuckers. is what they were. They couldn't put that bar down there. Get it in the hole.
I started looking and realizing we got 100 guys, 20 of them are in back school. I said, so 20% of our guys have a back problem. And I would tell you that of those 20, 19 would say back squatting was what triggered their back pain. So I started to look at that and think, well, so that kind of further reinforced my idea from I became associated with the word functional, which I never really wanted to be, but that's another story for another day. But
that's not a bad thing, is it?
Well, I mean, it was because, again, like I said, because people started to think I was Richard Simmons. You know what I mean? They started thinking that I'm walking around, with a headband and leg warmers on playing music. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing. I used to always say that people would come in. You can't tell you the number of people that came into our weight room and watched people lift and be like, you guys are strong. I can't believe they lift like this. And I thought, what did you think you were going to see? And I honestly think they thought they were going to see, guys doing like a bunch of lunges with dumbbells, and singing happy songs. And, but my sense, again, my understanding of athletic training, my understanding of rehab, all the things that I understood made me realize that this unilateral single leg idea just made sense. And then I started to play with it. And as I started to play with it, I started to realize, it not only makes sense, it works. All my back pain is gone. My performance numbers are going up. And then I started encouraging people to do research, and people started doing research on this and started to realize over and over again that, because what they realize now is there's something called bilateral deficit, which basically means that if I had you do a 1-leg squat, you would 1-leg squat more than half of what you could 2-leg squat.
Really?
When we do it relative to your body weight. So if we look at you and think, like, there's a guy named Alex Natera, who's a Australian rules football strength coach, who started doing all these studies on force plates. And he literally did the data. And basically he said that if you could do a 1-leg squat, a pure 1-leg squat, so you stood on 1 leg and you squatted down to, say, a bench at 18 inches and you stood back up again. If you could do that with 50% of your body weight, that was equivalent to you doing a double body weight back squat. So a guy, let's just say, if I use my son as an example, a guy 180 pounds can do that 1-leg squat with 90 pounds. That makes him a 360 squatter. And so, if he can do 90 pounds for 5, that would mean he could do 360 for 5 in a relative sense. What we found is most of our guys could get stronger on 1 leg than they could on 2. And we were doing it basically with very, very little orthopedic issues. We didn't have the back problems. We didn't have these other issues that were going along.
Nice. Well, how about nutrition, Mike? A lot of these programs, and especially the NFL, big college programs, they have the funds to feed these guys all the right foods. They have nutritionists now and all that stuff. But if you're just somebody training with you, whether it be a young kid or an older person, not necessarily the elite athlete who has those resources available to them, or the unlimited funds to go get shit, like how should normal people eat while they train? You hear about carbs, you hear about protein, fats, all that.
Well, it's funny because, as you know, that pendulum has swung. Because when you were playing, we were using carbohydrate supplements. Mm-hmm. It was very kind of the Rusty Jones influence. When we had Exceed, we were taking high
Exceed, baby.
We shifted to Exceed. Yeah.
What is this?
It was a drink. We mix it with water.
Okay.
We had ceremonial Exceed with our executive producer Eric Berman, Chris Doyle, and Mike Rabel. We'd sit around the night before a heavy squat, and we'd mix up a gallon of Exceed and pass it around like we were Native Americans passing around the.
It's like a whole ritual.
Oh, it was unbelievable. It was almost cult-like, but we cared about our squat. So Mike said that's what you did, so that's what we did. We ate spaghetti for dinner, and then we do our Exceed program at night to get loaded up, carbo loaded.
For the goal. Let's go.
So what seems to be the case now, which again, right, simple, balanced diet. You want to have some protein, you want to have some carbohydrate, you want to have some fat. If you're talking about kids, I always tell kids, if you want to be good at sports, don't eat like a kid. Right. Stay off the kids menu. Don't be going in if you're ordering chicken fingers and fries or a hot dog, then you're probably not going to end up being an elite performer. So, right.
Makes
It's like my
sense.
father would always say, meat and potatoes, right? Have, meat and potatoes, probably not a bad recommendation. You get some non-fried, reasonable quality protein and some vegetables and some potatoes, and you got yourself a pretty good meal.
Sure.
It's not, I always think nutrition is incredibly simple, but the implementation is hard. For adults, it's different in terms of now it's, coffee in the morning, alcohol at night, and, almost avoidance of food everywhere but at dinner. And so when you start looking at adults, what are you doing again, right? Balanced diet, eat 3 meals a day, try to get up and have something for breakfast. But now you get into the, when you start thinking about the weight loss thing, now you're into intermittent fasting is now currently fashionable in terms of, okay, try to do all your eating in 8 hours or 6 hours or whatever it is. And I think the thing with nutrition is if you just keep it kind of straight down the middle, and like I always say to people, if someone says to me, I want to lose weight, okay, then you should have a diet that consists mostly of lean proteins and vegetables. Say, I want to gain weight, okay, you should have a diet that consists mostly of lean protein and vegetables, but you can add some extraneous carbs to that diet. So you can up your calorie intake with some carbohydrates that the other person might not be able to do. And I always go back, and Guj, you'd remember this from your early human movement classes, but when they talk about body types, right? Endomorphs, basically fat people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ectomorphs, skinny people. Mesomorphs, muscular people. If you're looking at diet, an ectomorph, a skinny person, probably put them on a high carbohydrate, high calorie diet. It's going to work really, really well for them. Might not be great for their heart in the long run, but in terms of them gaining size and strength, they're going to do really well. You take that endomorphic guy, you've got to put that guy on a higher protein, lower carbohydrate diet. So we've got to limit they generally, overweight people tend to be more sensitive to sugar. That's just kind of the reality. So you've got to cut that carbohydrate number better. If you're that mesomorphic guy, right, which is everybody in the NFL except for the O lineman, you can eat right down the middle. Just
Nice. Well,
and that's why I think the biggest thing that teams have done is they feed the guys.
yeah.
Feed them on a regular basis. Feed them breakfast, feed them lunch, feed them twice before they get out of there, and then hope that they make a good decision at dinner. And I don't think there's anything particularly magical to nutrition, except creatine.
Creatine. Okay. Yeah, we were going to ask you about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Everybody good should be on creatine. You should be on creatine.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Okay.
Everybody takes creatine. So
why is that?
Because it's the safest, most effective, most well-researched sports supplement in history. There's been more work done on creatine, and every time the only even little kind of chink in the armor that they found was that sometimes they felt like creatine might have a little bit of a dehydrating effect and could be somehow related to muscle pulls or muscle cramps. And then that never really held any water, but that was the only even slightly perceived negative that appeared about creatine. Everything else has been positive. Creatine, if you can imagine, what creatine does, it's what they call a cell volumizer. So the best way to describe a cell volumizer is if you look at like a wet sponge versus a dry sponge, you take a dry sponge, you stick it out in water, it pulls all that water into the cell, right? Creatine would allow you to get more water into the sponge. That's why people gain weight so rapidly. And they always say, it's just water weight. And it's like, yeah, it is water weight, except that you're like 80% water anyway. So you're kind of all water weight, so it doesn't really matter. And when you're talking about cell volumizing, it's not like you're retaining water in tissues where you don't want to. You're retaining water everywhere. So that is beneficial. And some people have even said because it's a cellular retention, it actually, maybe you get stronger because it improves your leverages. There's a lot of theories, but all this stuff points in the right direction. And then there's some evidence now that it's got cognitive benefits too. But that's why with older people, they're starting to look at it and think it's probably beneficial.
I definitely need that. I'm sure you got it from somewhere, Bulgaria, wherever, plyometrics, us jumping around and doing a bunch of things on boxes and over hurdles and under things and over things and jumping off things. And I remember you used to tell stories about Billy Brooks jumping onto a Volkswagen and shit like that. I also remember us doing things like those farmers carries where we're just grabbing heavy dumbbells and walking around and that kind of functional training. I don't remember us, although I saw it later on, with the lifting tires and things like that, flipping tires and those types of movements. How do you see the evolution from just weight room, ground-based squat racks, benches into some of those other things? Obviously you created the popularity in a lot of those things, but I think people are using them. Everyday people now have bands in their house, and every gym you go in, there's bands and there's kettlebells, which I'd never seen before, that we found a way to lift weights with our hands and develop our hand strength and all kinds of stuff during your day early on.
Yeah, I think people always try to evolve it. I think some of it has to do with money, truthfully. Everybody wants to develop another tool that they can sell or another product that they can make. I would say 90% of what we're doing either with body weight or dumbbells these days, weight vests. I think you're always looking for ways to create more external resistance. We use sandbags now. We use sand collars to get more weight on people. I think the big evolution is, like I said, in the unilateral training and getting away from, again, what I would call non-functional training. We're getting away from, like, our adult clients. Nobody squats, nobody deadlifts, nobody bench presses. I always look at people and think, our adults don't touch a barbell, a straight bar anymore.
Really?
And even with our kids, like our athletes, like we hang clean, we bench press. We trap bar deadlift, so there's no more straight bar deadlift that's done. And almost all of our squatting, once somebody gets strong, is some sort of unilateral variation. And I think that's, what people would call functional training, which is this idea of just trying to make things a little bit more real life. And that's a lot of what we were already doing. Like you said, carrying things, standing on your feet, those types of things. But it's taking it one step further and saying, okay, I probably don't really need to stand on 2 feet. Because, you gave the example, right? Getting up and down the toilet is about the only time really doing anything on 2 feet. And I say this in my seminars, like, you don't ever get up and down from the toilet and think, hey, I'm going to put ox on my back when I take a shit, and then I'm going to try to get up, right? You don't have to squat.
So I've never thought that. That's for sure.
Right. So you don't need, like, people say, oh, you got to be able to squat. You do got to be able to squat. Absolutely. You should be able to get on and off the toilet. But, like, when I look at you, back in the day, the 660 days, like, I might have rethought some of those things down the road, and not even as much you, because truthfully, you were built to do it. I always used to tell you, you were probably made to be a power lifter more than you were made to be a football player,
yes,
right?
I would agree.
Think about John Tim is one kid that comes to mind, right? John Tim, I used to say, one of my friends, this guy, great cook, the guy who invented the functional movement screen, would always say, don't add strength to dysfunction. And I looked in my seminars, I say all the time, I used to add strength to dysfunction for a living. Because I would take a guy like John Tim and I would watch this ugly squat, right? And he probably got a 500 squat at some point. But if we looked at the video of that squat now, we would be like, oh God, be cringy. You'd be like, and we had some cringy lifting going on. I mean, I can remember why, I remember Jimmy Mercer being on 2 knees with about 370 pounds in a clean where he had missed it and fallen to both knees, and him trying to get up off the platform.
We were that kind of guy. So Mike,
yeah, he got to one leg. I remember he got to one leg, and I remember looking at him saying, put the fucking thing down, but I'm not giving you the lift. Like, you failed the lift. I understand you have it on your shoulders. You're not getting it. No matter what you do, you fuck up, you're not getting credit for that lift. We eventually chucked it. But, like, some of that stuff we probably didn't need. Like, we were really, really smart and progressive for the time that we were at. But as you review some of those things, you think that probably wouldn't be best practice today. And then if we look at it and say, kids, right? I always say kids, 2 groups. Kids are somebody's kids. So if I do something stupid with somebody's kid and they get hurt, that's a problem.
Sure.
Because I hurt somebody's child, right? Adults the same way. If I got, dad's in there, and I got him trying to see, if he can squat 400. And he blows out a disc in his back and can't go to work for 6 months, right? I just screwed up a whole family because, the breadwinner isn't going to work anymore. because I wanted to see if he could squat 400 pounds. Like, it's that back to that same risk reward idea where you start looking and saying, we always talk about, what we want is maximum benefit, minimum load. What's the most I can get out of this person, and what's the least weight I can have them do to get it? And that's going to vary. You know, I get a young college kid, that load might get pretty heavy. I get his mom coming in. Mom's probably not pulling sumo deadlifts from me at 225.
Well, Mike, this has been fabulous. I really appreciate your thoughts on all this shit. And you know what? You've influenced my life, obviously, so many other people, not just in your training, but in your message. And I think it's amazing that you're still doing it, and you're doing it on a much broader range of people than you were when we were together back in college, back in the days of BU. But I really appreciate, to have a guy like you on here that's spoke all over the world. To have you on InTrench'd.
On InTrench'd.
I told you I had some important friends.
This is awesome. This has been just great. I mean, like me, a little dog, as Gooch loves to point out time and time again. I have learned so much from because I don't think I can fool you guys into think I'm an athlete, because certainly not little dog, but I can learn and do some things even just from this conversation today. So I appreciate that. This has been awesome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Like I said, I get the chance to talk to Gooch for hour and a half and get the chance to see Ox.
Mike, I always give you something to think about, Mike. Come on.
Yes, you do.
I always come with some
always been.
Bullshitting, talking, having a laugh has never been a problem of mine.
Absolutely true.
Thank you, Mike. Give my best to the family.
All right. Thanks, guys.
You think of all of the knowledge and everything that we just learned from Mike Boyle. I mean, it's like the little dog part of me when I think of InTrench'd and I think of offensive linemen, strength, right? Like lifting more and adding muscle. But one of the things that fascinated me and kind of like stood out to me was the fact training athletes and everything that goes into that, aside from just the bulk and strength component of it all.
Well, when you think of strength coach, you think about power lifters and Olympic lifters. What you're finding here is that through his journey from becoming a strength coach early on and the trial and error, what worked, what didn't work, what made sense, what didn't make sense, for the 40 years he's been a strength coach and a conditioning coach, he's really turned into an athlete creator, if you will. That's what he is. He develops the athletic skills as much as he does the sports specific skills or strength specific skills. And obviously it pays off. I mean, his athletes perform and they succeed at their sport.
I mean, you think of everything that goes into it. One of the things that stood out to me is talking about this single leg philosophy. At first, I didn't know what the fuck that meant. But then the more he broke it down, I was like, oh shit. Okay. That makes a lot of sense right there.
Well, just like football, a lot of things come back to common sense, angles, leverage, usefulness, functionality, you put it all into play. And I think he's the father of modern functional lifting. I know he doesn't like that term, but I think that's a kind of a feather in his cap that he kind of started people on this path of functional training, things that really make sense to get your job done on the field. Because ultimately, as a coach, whether you're a strength coach or position coach or head coach, your job is to get your athletes to perform better. And if they're at optimum performance, everybody looks good.
Oh, you talk about with you being a position coach and then him with a strength coach. One of the things that really stood out to me was the language of coaching. And I know he touched on that and trying to, when he's out on the football field, relating to coach speak and how to communicate. To me, not in that world, I found that fascinating.
Well, especially football coaches. We are control freaks. We need to manage every portion of the game, every portion of our athletes. And a lot of times, and I did it much too often as a young coach, you tend to overstep your bounds, your boundaries. Listen, the bottom line is I coach pass protection. I coach run blocking. I pick up exotic blitzes. That's the things I need to convey to my athletes, fundamental football and schematics. The strength coach and a guy with such expertise as he do, his job is to get the players stronger, faster, and more athletic, and be able to move and be dynamic in many different directions. The problem is there's kind of a disconnect at times, and he, as he did to us as a player, he explains himself well. And if he can be able to talk coach speak and make it make sense to coaches, we'll let down that wall. We'll let him into our sphere of knowledge and now utilize what he has to offer. And I think he does as good a job of that as anybody. And now he's got stripes. He's got stripes. He's got pelts on the wall. He's undisputed, so nobody can really challenge. But when you're a young coach starting out, I could see people saying, hey, hey, what do you know? I'm the football coach. But he's proven them wrong.
There's so much there too. And with the nutrition and the recovery, I loved when he talked about work versus overwork. He has that athletic training background, which I know you kind of touched on, but like how important that is to really grasp the full knowledge and scope of everything he was bringing to the table there.
Well, not only could he speak coach, but he could speak trainer. And there are really multiple aspects of developing a player. You have your coach that develops the football end, the strength coach that develops the body, and the trainer that rehabs the body when there's pain or injury. Well, in order to, you want all three of those on the same page, and it has to be good conversation, a good connection between those people. And a lot of times, the strength coach is at odds with the training staff. Who knows better than what the training staff's going through than a strength coach that used to be a trainer? And so he can take that into consideration with not only development, but also being careful not to overdo things. And that's where you get into your work versus overwork. He knows what it takes to get the job done without overdoing it and put people in harm's way.
All right. Well, I mean, awesome stuff out of Mike Boyle. Another episode in the books. Follow at all the social media channels. That's at InTrench'd. And then also hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on InTrench'd.